Anatomy and physiology. So this quarter, we are going to be studying some anatomy. And when we talk about anatomy, we are talking about structures. So anatomy would be the study of the structure. So could be the form also. So the morphology, for example, the structure of bones, the structure of the heart, the layers of the blood vessel walls, for example, would all be examples of anatomy. So when we talk about these structures, we can talk about gross anatomy. So this is generally things that we can see. So for example, when we study gross anatomy, we might study a bone like the humerus, or we might study the heart. We might look at blood vessels. So those would be examples of gross anatomy. When we look at it underneath a microscope, we might be looking at very small sections. For example, through the bone, we might actually look at the histology of the bone. So we can talk about microscopic anatomy. Which would include histology, which is the study of tissues. So for example, we could study the epithelial tissues, we could study the connective tissues, we could look at the nervous tissue and the muscular tissue, like the cardiac muscle. So that would be all microscopic anatomy. Now, understanding structure oftentimes involves a lot of memorization of the different components of the parts. But we can't really understand the structure unless we understand the function. So oftentimes we say that form follows function. So really it is how it works, the mechanism that determines the form. So for example, the flow of blood through your heart is kind of what dictates the structure of the heart, right? So the valves, for example, the chambers that are muscular versus the ones that are not so muscular. And so in physiology and in anatomy, it's oftentimes great to study them together. So for the physiology, this is the mechanisms, the how it works. So how would be a good question. So for example, when we study the physiology of bones, we know that bones need to be strong. Some bones are stronger than others, and they are the ones that support our body weight, for example. So the femur is very strong. We also know that they have hollow spaces in them so that they contain bone marrow. And so we know the mechanism of blood formation in that red bone marrow. We also know that bones also need to be light, because if they were completely solid, they would be too heavy. And so we know that there is spaces within the bone that actually makes it lighter. So the physiology would be the mechanism. So oftentimes we say that the form follows the function. So form follows function. The function being the physiology and the form being the anatomy. So some people really like the physiology. It's more like telling a story. And it is less memorization, perhaps. So you could kind of just notice what you are more drawn to. Do you like memorizing the structures, like the structures of the heart, or do you like memorizing the structures on a bone? Or would you really rather just learn why? Why does that work? Or maybe both, putting both together is the best way for you to learn. And so we are going to be looking at systems like the skeletal system and the cardiovascular system this quarter. And we're going to be looking at how the anatomy of those systems follows the function of those systems.